Oh no, you guys, whatever will Joe Rogan do? The feminist news outlet, the Mary Sue, is coming after him for an interview he did with a presidential candidate? Welcome back to Words of Paradise. I'm your host, Leon Idol, and yes, the Mary Sue is coming after Joe Rogan for, what else? More vaccine-related nonsense, because apparently it's still 2019 to some people on the internet. So let's get into this incredibly brain-dead article, shall we? Spotify isn't even pretending to care about Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation problem anymore. It's really curious what you guys consider misinformation, because last I checked, so many things about the original COVID vaccines and mandates and all that turned out to be absolute bunk. Like, even to the point where the WHO and the CDC aren't recommending, about 90% of it anymore. So what is COVID misinformation? I want your definition, Mary Sue. And before we get into the article itself, I do want to give a special shout out to Vivian Kane, the senior news editor. Look at this peach right here. Vivian Kane, she, her. And it's not just a Mary Sue thing. She, of course, also has her pronouns in her Twitter bio. I did go ahead and check. Nothing too shocking. She's exactly who you think she would be, but she's the senior news editor at the Mary Sue, where she's been writing about politics and entertainment and all the ways in which the two overlap since the dark days of late 2016. You think late 2016 was the dark days? I got something really interesting to tell you about. It was called the 1930s, the Great Depression, or maybe even the 40s and the beaches of Normandy. Those were some really dark days if you consider 2016 dark, you privileged sap. Born in San Francisco and radicalized in Los Angeles, well, at least she's not trying to hide it. She now lives in Kansas City, Missouri, where she gets to put her MFA to use covering the local theater scene. Well, no wonder she's working for the Mary Sue, because I guarantee you no one reading about the local theater scene in the middle of BFE, Missouri. She's the co-owner of The Pitch, Kansas City's alt news and culture magazine, alongside her husband, Brock Wilbur. Hey, at least she's straight, I guess. To be fair, we have no idea. Maybe this Brock Wilbur character is, one of the tranny shenanigans and was a female first, with whom she also shares many cats. Well, thank God they're not breeding. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. probably has more to his presidential campaign platform than just being a staunch anti-vaxxer, but if so, he doesn't seem to be doing much to make people aware of it. Now, I'm going to stop right here and say, I've also said many times, both, on like Saturday Night Hypnosis, maybe on my own channel, I'm not sure, your boy here was recently called a hardcore MAGA right-winger for saying, I kid you not, that I actually like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a Democrat. I actually am very hopeful to see him make it all the way to, the full election, get past the primaries and beat out Joe Biden. I think he is a fantastic candidate. Now, whether you agree, disagree, that's a-okay, man. I'm all about freedom of speech, freedom for folks to believe what they want to and have political opinions they want to have. As long as you aren't touching kids, we can probably talk about politics and have a good time. That's my philosophy, at least. But yeah, that being said, it's just funny that, your boy here, who I've said many times is very much a centrist, was called a right-wing radical MAGA supporter for saying that I like a Democrat. It's a very strange time we live in, folks. Since entering the 2024 presidential race as a Democrat, RFK Jr. has been doing surprisingly well in his polling. When asked if they view the candidate favorably, a whopping 49% of respondents in a recent poll said yes. Now, Kennedy's family name is sure to be gifting him a lot of affinity from Democratic voters, and yes, I will admit, there's probably some nepotism in that, but isn't that where half you journalists, you entertainment and games journalists, get all of your accolades, is absolute nepotism? So yeah, this is pretty much the pot calling the kettle black here. His vocal criticism of Biden undoubtedly gives him a boost with the Let's Go Brandon crowd. Do people even say that anymore? Alright, fair enough. But he's also become a barometer for Dem voters' stance on vaccines, specifically the COVID-19 vaccine and all other politicized coronavirus hoopla. Don't say that. Don't be out there like, the over-politicized coronavirus, when you were literally some of the first individuals, even beating CNN in some instances, to over-politicize COVID-19. Now, don't act like you're all blasé about it. You perpetuated this stuff since 2019. Oh my goodness. Do you have any sense of self-awareness? This is hilarious. If a celebrity or other public figure comes out in support of Kennedy, it's not guaranteed they're an anti-vaxxer, but there's an extremely good chance that that's the case. Well, let me tell you guys, if you're watching this channel, it means you're probably smart enough not to base who you vote on around celebrity endorsements. Like, what? Who's Kid Rock supporting? Who's Kim Kardashian supporting? I don't care. They're celebrities. What they support have to do with me? I want to hear about issues and vote on policy and listen to the individuals speak. But yeah, if you're going to throw your hat in with whatever person that makes 6 figures or 7 figures has to say, then yeah, sure, go for it. Your funeral. Seeing as the anti-vax issue is basically Kennedy's entire deal. Oh, no. I would say him wanting to take on the intelligence agencies like the FBI and CIA, also probably a pretty big deal for a lot of people that, actually understand the deeper meanings behind politics beyond just COVID and comic books, which is all the Mary Sue seems to care about. At the very least, his supporters are willing to overlook that. Again, so what? If his policy is good, who cares what his personal view on vaccines is? Kennedy's extreme opposition to vaccines, bordering on obsession really, was on full display during his recent appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast. Now I'm going to give you once again full disclosure, I listened to the entire podcast. It was actually a blast. There were some parts that were a little, wonky, but hey, that's the Joe Rogan experience for you. I thought it was a great podcast. I wonder if something's going on with the RFK's voice, because man, it was even rougher than normal. Maybe he might be doing a press tour, maybe he's just, dude is 69 years old. Nice. But yeah, so I'd definitely say, hey, give it a listen. Even if you don't agree, it is good to be in the know. Just, you're gonna have to get used to his voice. You might remember Rogan came under fire in recent years for being a massive source of COVID misinformation. Really, COVID misinformation. You mean when he said this is probably a lab leak and then all the data ended up, going towards, yep, it's likely a lab leak? Or what about all the actual accredited doctors he had on his show? Like, Dr. Robert Malone, who, was one of the patent holders of the original vaccine information. Yeah, sure, COVID misinformation from literal doctors he was discussing with on his show. Now, granted, RFK Jr. isn't a doctor, but it is a field that he has expertise in when it comes to vaccines. There's been a lot of research. He is a lawyer. He's dealt with a lot of law. In fact, he brings up a lot of lawsuits in this particular episode. So I would say he is at least still more of an expert than you. And once again, I would like to rewind back to my very first question. What do you consider misinformation? Rogan has a gigantic audience. Definitely compared to yours, and uses a guise of ignorance, just asking questions, to spread dangerous conspiracies and falsehoods to millions of listeners. Now look, I'm not going to say Joe Rogan's right about everything, no one is, but at the end of the day, it's a podcast hosted by a comedian and a fight commentator. A dude who commentates on grown men in their skibbies beating the hell out of each other till someone, dies almost. What do you expect? He's at least out there asking more questions than you. I will take the meathead that asks questions over, the individual that just falls in line, shuts up, and does what they're told. In response to the outcry from medical professionals, music artists, and angry customers, Spotify at least pretended to care about protecting listeners from the lies being pushed by the man they were paying an exorbitant amount of money to do so, putting a content advisory on podcast episodes that discussed COVID-19. Yeah, they did do that, and I'll be honest, I've found that hilarious anytime I've gone to listen to any old episodes that do in fact show the content advisory, because a lot of them are on episodes with, I kid you not, legitimate doctors who are experts in the field. That did not stop Rogan from pushing COVID misinformation, but from the sound of it, his recent discussion with Kennedy takes things to a disturbing new level. So you say from the sound of it, so you didn't even listen to it. You're out here writing an article on a 3-hour podcast where so much information was covered, and you haven't even listened to it. I know I say every time I cover an article like this that your boy just wants a shred of journalistic integrity from outlets like this, but how you gonna write an entire article slandering not one, but dose individuals, and you haven't even listened to the actual podcast itself? What were you doing for the 3 hours that you could have been listening to this episode? Surely you weren't writing up something in your, FMA, your Kansas City Theater pitch magazine that no one's gonna buy. What was the last big hit play out of Kansas City, Missouri? You really couldn't take 3 hours to at least get some information on what you were gonna write an article on. Because I guarantee you get paid more by the Mary Sue than you do your homegrown pitch musical theater magazine. As Motherboard's Anna Merlin describes it, the conversation was an orgy of unchecked vaccine misinformation. I'm gonna stop right there. Very much checked vaccine information. They came with sources. Robert Kennedy absolutely came in with sources. Now, how valid are those sources? Well, that is an interesting question. But then again, how valid were CNN's sources when over half of everything they said during the COVID timeline ended up getting redacted because it was incorrect? Fauci kind of more or less resigning in disgrace, if we're being completely honest about what really happened. So yeah, I don't really want to hear about unchecked vaccine misinformation. The dude came with sources, and if you want to question his sources, That's fine. I'm all for questioning science, but you gotta also question your own sources. You don't just get to pick and choose. This ain't some sort of buffet. Some conspiracy mongering about 5G technology and Wi-Fi, and of course, Rogan once again praising ivermectin, an ineffective faux COVID treatment. Oh, right, the medicine that won a Nobel Prize and has been administered to literally millions of people. At least you aren't going so far as to call it horse dewormer like so many others did. Yeah, I don't know if it was a faux COVID treatment or not, but I do know it wasn't just Rogan that took it. Other doctors did in fact talk about using ivermectin. As RFK began his campaign by downplaying his anti-vaccine activism, the conversation represented a bit of a return to form, but the episode also conclusively demonstrates that Spotify, that platform that reportedly paid more than $200 million to host Rogan's show, has completely given up on addressing his relentless torrent of medical misinformation, except in the most pallid and surface-level ways. I mean, guys, COVID's over. Is it still floating around out there? Yeah, sure, in small doses and variants and whatnot, but COVID's over. Do you really have nothing better to do than criticize one of your own, technically, a Democratic presidential candidate and a comedian about how they're talking about how the vaccine was handled when, let's be honest, people aren't even really getting the vaccine anymore? I haven't heard anything about people getting their 37th booster in quite some time, so maybe, just maybe, there's some more pressing articles that you could be writing, but no, you want to jump to the easy Joe Rogan clicks, which, hey, to be fair, if you're going to grift like that, I'll do it too. I'm sure just throwing Joe Rogan's name in a YouTube title will guarantee me some clicks, but at the end of the day, the real reason I'm doing this is because I actually watched the episode. I have a semblance of understanding about what was covered, which is more than I can say for you. Rogan and Kennedy talked for 3 hours, which sounds utterly unbearable in itself, and once again, proving you didn't listen to it, during which time RFK Jr. touted infectious and dangerous treatments, suggested vaccines cause autism. They absolutely do not. Well, actually, I'm not going to be one that says they do. I'm not a doctor, I don't know. However, he does bring up a lawsuit which was won by the person accusing a vaccine of causing autism. Enough evidence was produced in that particular lawsuit for the $20 million award that, yeah, the vaccine was in fact causing autism in, very young, like infant level babies. Or sorry, they were about 2 years old. So hey, there's at least one documented court-recorded case of it happening. So, and that's also the only one he brought up. So I'm just saying, you can't say they absolutely do not. The last I checked, you weren't a doctor. You write articles about musical theater. So I don't really want to hear your they absolutely do not when you aren't an expert either. You have less credentials in the field than RFK Jr. Why should we believe you when, again, he brought sources? And also falsely said vaccines contain a dangerous and potentially fatal type of mercury, as well as other toxics. No, once again, I'm going to walk that back. That's not what he said. He said vaccines used to. He was talking, if I remember correctly, about, vaccines in like the 60s, and he gave a very detailed history on the different types of mercuries and what was and wasn't allowed to be used, and when they swapped it out for aluminum, and gave a bunch of other, again, accredited information from studies and sources. Now, are those studies and sources correct? I don't know, because we've seen time and time again that the medical industry can in fact be usurped by people who are just looking for financial gain. So maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But he was citing other peer-reviewed papers and, actual articles. What are your accreditations? You're always the individuals. Trust the science, says the Mary Sue. Well, he brought the science, and now what? You don't want to trust it because you don't like the fact that you've been wrong the last 3 years? If you think Spotify might be reluctant, or at least embarrassed to be platforming this sort of dangerous drivel, you would be wrong. Again from Motherboard, because yeah, they're going to cite Motherboard again, since Motherboard actually apparently listened to the podcast, and you can't write an article yourself if you didn't watch it, so you're just going to steal someone else's work. In response to a request for comment from Motherboard, a Spotify spokesperson offered the following statement: Spotify has long-standing policies that help us balance creator expression and listener preferences while minimizing the risk of offline harm. We have multiple measures to ensure the content on Spotify is in keeping with our policies. In a separate email, the same spokesperson added, since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we removed over 20,000 podcast episodes for violating our dangerous, false, or dangerous, deceptive medical information policies within our platform rules. Apparently, a Spotify rep insists that Rogan and Kennedy didn't violate those policies because while the two mused about vaccines causing autism, killing people, and just genuinely not working as intended, they didn't, as Merlin writes, explicitly say they were designed to do those things. And that, that, I guess, is completely acceptable and worth $200 million and access to a massive platform. I guarantee you, you would jump at the chance to receive $200 million to write right-wing stuff for, I don't know, like Tucker Carlson or something. If someone slapped a $200 million dick on your table right now and said, boom, here this is, cash in hand, you can have it. But you gotta write pro-right-wing stuff for Tucker Carlson. Do not pretend that you wouldn't just throw all of your LA radicalization right out the window for that kind of money. This is the biggest podcast in the world. I'd say they probably knew what they were doing when they decided to drop that level of money on it. Yeah, guys, it's a fascinating episode. Even if you vehemently disagree with what's being said, I think it's still wise to, at least know your enemy, have an idea of what's being said. I think a lot of it was very interesting. I also don't know if it's true or not. Your boy ain't a doctor. I talk about video game news for most of my channel, but it is absolutely hilarious to see the left eating their own. There was a time when a Kennedy running for office would have just made every lefty's panties wet and just drop. You could just hear the sloshy sounds. But now, no, you bring up Robert FK and all of a sudden people throwing a fit because, oh, he's telling the truth about the vaccine mandates and the vaccine history that so many of us have known for so long. You just slow on the uptake. But those are just my opinions. Let me know yours in the comments below, or let me know on Twitter where you can find me at Bolt the Word. And please do subscribe. I am a nerdy news channel. I cover nerdy news every day. Not always about, Joe Rogan or vaccine stuff, but video games, anime, Magic the Gathering, you name it. It's all here in the nerdosphere. And this has been Words of Paradise.